Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted that you joined us for today's webinar, Trailblazer Tuesday, with Acting FTA Administrator Veronica Vanterpool. My name is Dr. Karen Philbrick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. We are a university transportation center focused on improving the mobility of people and goods. To that end, we lead 4 competitively selected multi-university consortia. We accomplish our goals through surface transportation research, technology transfer, education, and workforce development. Our mission is to improve mobility for all by increasing the safety, convenience, accessibility, and efficiency of our transportation systems. Today's webinar is part of MTI's Trailblazer Tuesday series for Women's History Month. We are so excited to feature Veronica today, a woman of substance and grace who exudes emotional intelligence and compassion along with her expertise in transit. Prior to becoming the acting FTA administrator on February 24th, so just 10 short days ago, she was deputy administrator for 2.5 years. She has 17 years of experience in advocacy, policy, communications, public outreach, and coalition building. In her current position, she works to achieve the goals of the Biden-Harris administration, and that includes equity, climate, innovation, safety, and workforce development. Among her many achievements, which are too numerous to list, she is co-founder of the Delaware chapter of WTS. She's a member of Latinos in Transit and a 2023 honoree by Compto for a Woman Who Moves the Nation Award. With that, let's get started because we only have 28 short minutes. Veronica, thank you for making the time in your busy schedule to be with us today. Can you start by just telling us how you entered the field of transportation?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. And Dr. Philbrick, thank you so much for inviting me into this discussion with you. And thank you so much for your leadership and MTI's work, particularly in this space. In fact, I think it was Mineta Transportation Institute that first identified that women comprised 15% of the transportation workforce, a statistic that I use often to highlight the impact, but the progress yet to be made. But I got into the transportation field really from a transition, seemingly, from the environmental field. So my background is in environmental policy and science. It's what I went to school for and what my early jobs were in. And then I pivoted. And as we know, it wasn't a sharp pivot because of the intersections between the transportation sector and the environmental sector. But I started working at a small New York City-based nonprofit advocacy group. And I started working on sustainable transportation, but most specifically, congestion pricing. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me to learn so much about transportation as an issue area, but also more specifically, the role of finding revenue sources to support public transportation.
Very good. And you've definitely found your passion. So you are a woman focused on equity. Can you discuss the importance of advancing equity in transportation specifically?
My predecessor, the beloved administrator Nuria Fernandez, has often noted that transit is the great equalizer. And that's because anyone of any income, background, ethnicity, most abilities. So we are even trying to make sure that our public transportation system supports individuals living with disabilities, but making sure that it is a system and a form of mobility that really gives everyone equal access to opportunity. And
that is so important. Sorry.
No, it is incredibly important. And it is important from so many angles, from an economic perspective, because we know the cost of car ownership is prohibitive for many individuals. And for many across the United States and certainly across the world, public transportation is that connector to, again, economic opportunity, but really connecting people to what matters at the most broad explanation.
And that just reminds me of some current research that was released that shows people who lack connectivity People who are socially isolated have physical health that's equivalent to those who smoke up to 15 cigarettes a day. So it is so vital, and I connect with everything you said. Thank you for that. And I'm very curious, if you're comfortable, can you talk about how your identity as a Latina woman has shaped and helped you get to where you are today?
As we think about transit as the great equalizer and equity as such an important factor in delivering and the provision of transit service, we can only make it the great equalizer if we bring different perspectives into that. So it's important to have individuals living with disabilities share their voice and their experience on transit. Maybe they can be a board member, for example. I, as a Latina, but also a user of public transportation and someone who grew up in New York City reliant on buses and subways, bringing that perspective in helps me, helps guide how I envision transit broadly, how transit can be better, how transit is a wonderful mode, right? Because I can speak to how it's connected me to what matters. So it's been incredibly important also from the perspective when I think about some of the statistics that define my community. So my community being a transit user, someone who grew up in the Bronx, New York City, someone who is Puerto Rican, and understanding that, for example, in the Bronx had the lowest car ownership rate outside of Manhattan. So it was incredibly important to provide good quality and affordable and convenient and reliable public transportation because I understood what that meant as a Bronx user. As a woman, it's incredibly important to me to be on systems that are safe, that are well lit, that have connectivity that is seamless, right? So I bring that perspective as a woman. As a Latina, incredibly important because I understand that in the Latino community, particularly in many cities, public transportation is the predominant form of mobility. And so understanding all those statistics and all that context shapes the decisions that I make and gives me a perspective and a strong advocacy voice for not just my lived experiences, but other lived experiences that are analogous to this. And it's just really, I can't speak enough to how one's shared and lived experiences are important to bring into your professional world.
Absolutely. And among your many roles, you are a mother. And so I imagine that as a mother with a young child, using the transit system, that also gives you a unique experience and an understanding of that seamless connectivity piece.
Absolutely. So thank you for noting that, because as women, we have many roles and it's important that we talk about all of those roles. And I was very fortunate to have access to a vehicle most of my life, a privilege. I no longer have a car, which is incredibly liberating, in fact. But I was privileged to have access to a vehicle, own my own car for the time that my son was younger. As you know, Dr. Philbrick, my son is a young man now. He is 23 with his access to his own vehicle. But I was still very much a user of public transportation because I did not drive into the city. That would be nuts for me to do. But I was fortunate and glad to have access to a car because there were many communities that I could not travel on public transportation, even throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City, because there were some transit deserts. And just having the flexibility of the vehicle, but also to complement areas where I would not drive. So my son and I were often doing many things together, and it was nice to have an option because many times being on the subway or the bus was more entertaining and more enriching for our experience. So if we were going to the Bronx Zoo, doing so on the bus was part of the experience. And, you know, I think it's incredibly important to talk about how our experience on public transportation recreationally and culturally are also important experiences. We spend a lot of time rightfully talking about the importance of transit connecting us to housing and education and employment. But it's also, as we know, a very important connector for all those other rich experiences.
That's so true. And it reminds me of a study we did several years ago that showed that returning veterans reintegrated into society and were more healthy if they were located in close proximity to transit, because they could get to places of employment and doctor's appointments and those social engagements. Now, I know we have a lot of questions that were pre-submitted and some that are coming in now, but I've got one more for you. I started by talking about your emotional intelligence, which is just really refreshing and eye-opening, and it allows you to connect with so many people. So to that end, what advice do you have for leaders and emerging women leaders on balancing that emotional intelligence with their assertiveness so that we don't play into the stereotypes that are so negative?
I very much appreciate this question. I think I would start with recommending and advising people to take the time to get to know people, because our emotional intelligence is based on, it's context sensitive, right? And it's person specific. And the more opportunities we create for ourselves to engage with different people with different perspectives and different opinions and different lenses, helps shape and develop and strengthen that emotional intelligence. If we keep talking to the same types of people all the time without conflict, it's a little harder to develop that emotional intelligence. So I think it starts with very basic engagement, right? Taking the time to authentically engage with someone. And even if it's just 4 minutes of that concentrated time, that matters. Because many times when we engage with people, we may not be 100% connected. We're looking around them. We're thinking of something else that may be pressing on our minds. And that certainly has an impact on how we're developing that moment and receiving that information. So I would say, learn to authentically connect with people and be interested in what they have to say. And that can be just 4 minutes. It needn't be a 20-minute conversation. And then with regards to how do we balance that emotional intelligence with being assertive and being direct, I think it's always important to know one's audience, whether that audience is a person of one or that audience is of 700 in an auditorium. And because what you learn from those types of forums is how to make your voice heard, right? And the tactic and the strategy is going to change depending on the forum that you're in. But what I found most effective in my career is being solid in my position, but not being sort of immovable or unwaverable. Mm-hmm. And with that has come a tremendous amount of confidence to never feel threatened by any type of forum and any type of audience. So I have now over many years developed a confidence to be in any kind of situation and say what I want to say. And I've learned to do so in a way that is not combative or confrontational, but confident. Mm-hmm. And I think confidence and assertion go well together, because when you feel confident in your perspective and confident in the information that you have or the data points that you want to share, it's easier to find that balance between being assertive and making sure that your voice is not lost in a larger discussion or conversation.
And you also have a healthy dose of diplomacy, which allows you to deliver somewhat difficult messages at times in a way that people can hear and understand. But I want to comment on something you said a few minutes ago, and that was the power of listening with intention and communicating with meaning. Too often people are just rehearsing what they want to say when your lips start moving. And so I think that tidbit for emerging leaders, I just want to underscore how important that is, because people can tell if you're listening. And I have personally seen you many, many times paraphrase what someone has said. So you're actively letting them know you heard, you understand, and you absorb. So, so important. We have a question that was pre-submitted for you that I think is just great. How do strategies that target the inclusion of women cross over to include other historically underrepresented groups so that everybody is uplifted?
When we focus on making sure all perspectives are heard and represented, cultivated, and developed, we develop strategies that are all inclusive. So it may start with one underrepresented group. So it may start with individuals who are living with disabilities. But when you are providing in a streetscape, a curb cut, or different treatments that make it easier for that individual using an assisted device, that is benefiting someone who is working on crutches or someone who is pushing a stroller, right? So when we start to think of the needs of one group, but then we realize that expanding that, or rather the benefits go beyond just that one group. And I think about that in terms of women and how we have engaged women, particularly at FTA. So two stats that I love to tout at FTA is that we are 53% women at FTA. Our percentage is incredibly high. In fact, it's the highest of within the Department of Transportation amongst our sister agencies. And with regards to people of color, we are 47% people of color at FTA. And I love to tout that because it shows the intentional engagement and effort to bring women and people of color into our FTA family and into our FTA work environment. And a lot of those strategies have worked together to improve those statistics. So strategies that are about active recruitment at places where there's women may be seeking jobs, or people of color may be seeking jobs, or educational institutions or associations, right? So there's so much overlap and intersection that when you have a very comprehensive and holistic strategy to improve inclusion, you are really hitting so many different underrepresented groups. And FTA has done that incredibly well. As have other entities, but I always love talking about FTA statistics.
Well, I would hazard a guess that that's the most diverse FTA has ever been in its history.
So yes, indeed, and particularly with the percentage of women. But I do also know from our team that it has solidly been a very diverse work environment for quite some time. So certainly having leadership at FTA that reflects the population we serve, right? Mm-hmm. So you have, with Administrator Fernandez, the first Afro-Latina Senate confirmed FTA administrator, and then me as, Latina as her deputy. And then when you look at our leadership at FTA, of our 19 leaders, 10 of them are female. So there has been some consistent diversity, and it's fluctuated. I do think we are the highest we've ever been, but I'm proud to say that it's been quite this diverse for, quite some time now.
That's just wonderful. And of course, I have to comment on something you said. You talked about curb cuts really being beneficial to all. And that reminds me of our revered founder, may he rest in peace, Secretary Norman Y. Mineta. And when he was in Congress, he put himself in a wheelchair, which he did not need, and traversed the city so that he could gain a firsthand understanding of what that experience was like. And one was a major proponent for the curb cuts. Thank you for reminding me of his power and his leadership.
And thank you for sharing that, because it really does show the importance of stepping out of one's shoes and context and really embracing and learning. Because if we as leaders are not constantly learning, then we're failing as leaders.
Ooh, I like that. So if we're not constantly learning, we're failing as leaders. Well, that's a good one. I might use it as my own.
As you wish, Dr. Philbrick.
Thank you. And we've had some questions in chat, so I'm going to read it verbatim because I'm just seeing it here. Most of the mentees that I work with are female, and they often ask if being active in technical and professional transportation societies would help them in their career development. Now, this is interesting because you're active in Latinos in Transit, WTS, and multiple associations. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the key word is active, as the person who asked the question noted. It's not enough to just be a member of. You have to be active, because those experiences will be what you make of them. And if someone is joining something and expecting sort of benefits by osmosis, that person will be somewhat disappointed. We need to be active in how we shape our experiences, and being part of these associations and membership groups is incredibly important if you intend to be active. And there's so many opportunities to engage, to network. I've been so impressed with so many of these associations that I have come to be more involved with, much later in my career. And I see the benefits for those who are participating in committees, joining online webinars, attending events and conferences if they can, because those can be pricey, but at least availing themselves of the opportunities that are offered for all different types of participants. So yes, I think there's benefit, but the key word is active.
And this reminds me, you are a woman of action and you are a woman of your word. And the lesson for our emerging leaders here is follow through. Close the loop. Be someone who does what you say you're going to do. That is so important to success.
Absolutely. I appreciate your underscoring of these messages, because they are key takeaways from how we present in this space, and how we want to continue to work with emerging and new leaders, particularly young women.
It's actionable intelligence at its finest.
Indeed.
We've got another question for you. What advice would you offer women in a male-dominated industry? This is a good one.
So I'll start with a very practical tip. Always sit in the middle of the conference room. Don't ever sit on the periphery. Don't ever sit at the end. And the reason I said that, so obviously our work environments have changed, and many of us are engaged in virtual work environments, maybe for a larger percentage than half of our workday. But it really comes down to positioning, and it comes down to placement, and it comes down to access. So I would say it was incredibly important when I was younger and coming into this space. I was the only woman of color in a leadership role in the nonprofit sector in the New York metro region, working with all different stakeholders, including governors and commissioners and community leaders and transit CEOs and elected and appointed officials, many of whom were men. But I came in at a unique time where a lot of leaders during that time were women. And what I learned from them is know your stuff, right? Make sure that you are confident in the material that you have and the data that you have. Because, and I noted this earlier, I think confidence is incredibly important, because there's often situations where you're engaged with people who exude that confidence, but don't have the right information.
Right.
Or just flat out wrong. And I have built, I think, an early reputation of having information, knowing it well, and being very confident in how I presented that. I think confidence is a big part of showing up in a male-dominated field or a male-dominated culture, because and confidence is not to, and we know this, and this is part of the emotional intelligence, it's not to be confused with being the person who's always talking. In fact, our secretary of the Department of Transportation does a lot of listening in the rooms. And when he speaks with a good deal of confidence and authority. And we as women need to feel very comfortable. It's not about the number of words that you say, it's the quality of what you say. So I have found that to be a very successful strategy in this field, is being very confident, not just in delivery. This is in your knowledge of the sector, the knowledge that you have. Be confident in that, because then that allows you to show up in spaces that can sometimes be very challenging.
So be brief, be brilliant, and be seated, I think, is the takeaway there.
I like that.
So, but you just tickled something in my brain, which is this confidence that you're speaking of. It can take years to develop. Can you talk about a time where maybe you experienced the imposter syndrome and how you worked through that to gain the confidence that you so gracefully exude today?
I have never had imposter syndrome, but what I have had is humility. I have recognized that there are things that I don't know. I have recognized that I am junior. Throughout my career early on, I have recognized that there are people whose leadership I've wanted to learn from and draw takeaways from. So I've always been aware of my limitations, but then identified them so I could work on them. And that has been very, very helpful for me in sort of developing my confidence, right? And thinking through, well, what are my areas of improvement? So I don't see it as I'm not good enough. I've seen it as, this is what I'm good at. This is what I can be better at doing. And how and who do I watch to get better at those things? And then really focusing on that. So I remember I'm always watching how people present and how they speak in public settings and large forums. And I'm still taking tips from that and learning from that. So I'm always in observer mode. And that has been incredibly enlightening for me. So I think that confidence comes with humility, but self-awareness, right? We all are really good at things, and we all have areas of development. And I never say weakness. I always say we all have areas of development. And as long as you start to identify them and then address them, right? Over time, you build that confidence.
I'm writing myself notes frantically because you've said so many great things, and I'm so sad because it's 12:28 already. But what I hear you talking about really is intentionality in your observations, intentionality in your communications, and combining that with action. And I think that's so important. But you also underscored the power of the words, the self-talk that you use. So not a weakness, but an opportunity for development or a challenge to overcome. And it reminds me that we need to be so important about our internal dialogue, because your brain believes what you tell it. You need to be very careful about the narrative that you weave.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, my friend. You were just absolutely perfect. We're so grateful for your time. We know how busy you are. So thank you for making the space to help our emerging leaders and our current leaders develop even further.
Thank you, Dr. Philbrick, for, first of all, kicking off this series with 4 amazing women. I look forward to tuning into the next 3 sessions, many of whom are revered colleagues in this space. So thank you for the work that you do, and for the team, and just for spotlighting and highlighting this discussion. And thank you for your leadership and your friendship.
Thank you. And with that, I'm sad to say our time has come to an end. But I'd like to thank you again, Veronica, for sharing such powerful stories and insights as we celebrate Women's History Month. And to your point, please join us next week on March 12th at 1 p.m., where we will feature Tilly Chang. She's the Executive Director of the San Francisco County Transportation Authority, a WTS member, a scholarship winner from WTS, and much, much more. So with that, I thank you again, and I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye.